In this video, I want to show you how to use PCRS to check that your solutions to your exercises are correct and to submit the exercises. So here I am on PCRS. I go to this URL, and let's say that I want to work on this challenge in Workshop 2 materials. So I'll click on Learning PCRS. And here I have the one problem that I have in this Learning PCRS challenge, which is taking med. It's a problem that you've seen during the workshop. Here's the problem. So what I would recommend for this kind of problem, which is not completely trivial, is to actually work on it in Paizo at first. So what I'll do here is I'll just copy the problem definition and I'll go to Paizo where I already have my file takingmed.py. So let me just insert this problem so that we have it in front of us. Now let me start working on the problem. So I need to define a function called takingmed. And let me just write here, so let's say that this is med and this is med list. And what you need to do, according to the problem, is to return true if med is in this list and to return false if it's not. So let me first write the design recipe here. So what it says here is write a function called takingmed that takes a list of medications that the patient is taking and a name of a single medication. So it takes in a list of strings and it takes in a string, and then what we're saying is we should return true if the medication is in the list of medications, and we should return false otherwise. True and false are of type Boolean, so I'll write that I need to return Boolean type here, like that. And now let me say, so return true if the medication med string is in the list med list, and false otherwise. So when we're writing a function according to the design recipe, what we need to do is we need to provide some examples. So what's one example? So here we have a list. So we'll say taking med, like that. And if this is at event, for example, we'll say, okay, at event is in the list, so we need to return true. What's an example where we want to return false? Well, here's an example where we want to return false. If, for example, we have something like paracetamol, that's not in the list, so we ought to return false. Another good example to think of is what happens if the patient is not taking any meds. So in that case, here this would be an empty list, and this can stay paracetamol, or it could be anything else at all, and the answer would still be false because paracetamol is not in this empty list. Okay, all done, and now we can get to actually writing the function. So what I need to do is I need to go through this list, med list. So I'll say for I in range length of med list, like this. And how do we do it? So we'll say, okay, so the element that we're looking at currently is med list at I, and we want to check whether med list at I is the same as the med that we're looking for. So we'll say if med list at I is equal to med, well, that means that med is definitely in the list med list, right? Because we found an element in med list which is the same as med, which means that we ought to return true. And let me make another mistake. You might have seen me make a previous mistake already, which we'll fix later. And let me say that I want to return true, like that. Should I return false here? Well, no, because if I say else return false, like so, then what's going to happen is the second that med is not equal to any one element of med list, doesn't have to be the specific element, right? So any one element in med list, I'll return false, and I shouldn't do that yet because I ought to check all the elements in med list to see if any one of them matches med. So I shouldn't return false now, I should return false here, and let me again make the mistake of putting false in quotes. Great. Okay, so at this point I might try and paste it into PCRS to see if I got lucky and everything worked the first time. Usually it won't. Okay, so I pasted everything into PCRS and now I can press submit. Well, that's unfortunate. Nothing matched. So here I should have returned true, but I returned false in quotes. Here I should have returned false, but I returned false in quotes. And what you see here is that the types don't actually match. The expected output is of type Boolean, and it's false. What I actually got from my code was of type string, and it says false, but it's a false in quotes. So what you see is that I didn't actually do the thing that I promised to do in the docstring for the function. So let me fix that. What I should actually return is true without the quotes. So the true in quotes was of type string. This true is of type Boolean. I should do the same thing here. At this point, I'm tempted to try again. Let me copy and paste the code and try to submit it again to PCRS. You can submit as many times as you like. Okay, progress. I've passed 2 out of 3 cases. But here you see, so the expected was true and what I actually returned was false. Sad face. Okay, let me try and see what went wrong. So here I actually have the test expression that PCRS used in order to test my code. It's this. So let me copy and paste it and try to run it in Paizo. Okay. Now I can say, for example, print taking med this to make sure that PCRS is not making things up. Okay, so I ran it and I do indeed return false here, even though Ataven is in the list. What to do? So let me put in a breakpoint here and try and see where I'm going wrong. Okay, so at this point I read in the function, didn't do anything with it, and at this point I'm trying to print the return value of taking med when using those arguments. So if I want to trace inside the function, I want to say debug step into. Here I am, I'm going inside the function, and now I'm here. So let me look at the values of those parameters. So what's the value of med? Well, med is a list of 5 elements. If I click here, you can actually see the elements. What's med list? Well, that's Ataven. So straight away, you probably see the problem. Here I'm saying for I in range length of med list, but med list is just Ataven, it's not the list. The problem is I didn't follow this description exactly here because I gave the med first and then I gave the med list. It still worked because you can treat strings as lists in Python in most cases. So when I say for I in range length of med list, Python said, okay, I'll do that. So let's follow along for just a little bit. So if I try to say length of med list, that's going to be 6. 6 is the number of letters in Ataven, so everything is good. And then if we go to the next line, we say if med list at I is equal to med. What happens here? Well, this will be false. Why is that? Because med list at I is going to be A, as you see here, and med is this. So the string A, it's not at all equal to this list, so we won't return true. And that's going to keep being the case here. We'll try all 6 letters in ativan and compare them to the list med. That'll never evaluate to true, and eventually we'll get to line 20 where we return false. So that was the problem. Let me stop debugging for a second and let me say med list here, and let me say med here. Let me try to run this in Paizo first. Okay, this returns true, so that's promising. And let me copy it back into PCRS. Try to submit it. Awesome. PCRS is happy with all the examples. One more thing I wanted to show you. One of the advantages of following the function design recipe is that you can actually, if you write those test cases, you can try them straight away before even submitting them, or before, if you are doing software developing, passing the code on to your boss or your coworkers or something like that. So let's try that. Let me copy this example and just try to run it. So for example, this we said should be true. Let's see if it actually is. So I can run this example, and here it is true. Let me try this example. I can actually just highlight it in Paizo and run it from here. This is false, as it should be. And this too is false, as it should be.